2 years ago you went broke because you purchased the Canon R6, which promised to solve all of your problems. This week Canon launched the R6 Mark II and is now promising to solve all the current problems that you have with the R6. Should you go broke again? Hi everyone, my name is Julian Skurani and today we're going to talk about all the specs of the Canon R6 Mark II. First things first, let's talk about the sensor. Up until last week, Canon was expecting you to buy the R6 with its 20 megapixel sensor, and it was saying that it was fine because the technology behind it was so good that the pictures would still turn out great. That might be true, but for a camera that came out in 2020, 20 megapixels is a bit little, I think. And there we are today that the Canon has improved the sensor's pixel count on this new camera and has made it 24.2, and they're trying to sell you the solution of a problem that they made themselves. Of course, it's known that Canon, maybe also other camera manufacturers, do cripple their cameras in order to sell solutions to them later, but that's quite an obvious one in my opinion. And even now with this sensor, it's still 9 megapixels less than the Sony a7 IV, which is in the same price category, and it's also still less than the EOS R, the original mirrorless camera from Canon, which has 30 megapixels. But speaking of improvements, this camera works with the same batteries as the R6 and the R, but it has an improvement on the battery life of up to 50%. And also because the processor has been made more efficient, the overheating issues with the R6 should have been solved up to a certain degree, but that still needs more real-world testing to see. One thing to note is also that there is no longer a 30-minute limit. Even though to me the 30-minute limit that I have on my EOS R was never a problem, I guess there are people out there who might find that useful. About the ergonomics, the camera is pretty much the same size, the same weight, but there are some differences in switches. For example, where the on-off button used to be, now there is a switch to go from video to photo. The R6 Mark II also has customized modes for video that can help you in your workflow to be faster. Of course, because this switch was placed where the on-off switch used to be, now the on-off switch has switched places and is now on the right side of the camera. I don't know about that. In my EOS R, to be fair, I don't really have a problem with the on-off button being on the left, but I guess that will make it even easier to control the camera with only the right hand, which is the main hand anyways. All in all, it's a big plus. Because of the video to photo switch, I don't mind any other changes that were necessary to be made in order for that switch to exist. So happy about that. And they're also saying that the joystick is improved over the previous one, even though it looks the same. In my EOS R, I don't even have a joystick, so I don't know what to say about that, but that's something new. Now, speaking of speed and fast, now the R6 Mark II can shoot up to 40 frames per second electronically, which is twice as much as the old R6 could do. And it can also shoot 12 frames per second mechanically. There are also pre-shooting and pre-recording modes built in the camera, which if you activate them, then the photos, when you're shooting burst mode, for example, the photos start up to, I think, half a second before you press the button, so you don't really, to help you not miss the action. And the same is with video, so I think that will definitely be helpful to some people out there. The autofocus seems to also have a huge improvement over the R6. It can, for example, detect a horse. About objects, it can detect trains, airplanes and helicopters. So if you are into that kind of stuff, then that's a good thing to know. And the R6 Mark II also has an auto mode, so when you're changing, for example, from an object to an animal, you don't need to go to the autofocus and change exactly which one you're trying to photograph. That would take too long. So it has an auto mode and the camera detects it for you. Another big plus is that now you can use the high dynamic range mode for moving objects. Like before, if you would use the high dynamic range mode, like HDR mode, to take a photo of something that is moving, then it will, because the photos are taken like one after the other and it takes some time, then you would see some shades in the object that was moving through the frame. But that is fixed now. I don't know how they did it, but good job about that, I guess. Another one is that you can record 4K 60 frames per second with no crop at all, like zero. Before it used to be like 1.1, 1.2 or something, and the same is in the Sony a7 IV. It has a 1.2 times crop, so for some people out there that might be useful, I guess. It has definitely been in the R6 better than the EOS R, which can't even shoot 4K 60 and 4K 30. It has a 1.7 something times crop, so yeah, that's a big plus as well. And this time the footage is an oversampled one from 6K footage, so it is a bit sharper than it used to be the 4K in the old R6. And it can also shoot a 6K RAW with an external recorder. This all sounds good to me. The only problem is that, like the R6, all the high frame rates that this camera can shoot at do not have the all-eye codec. But on the other hand, it's better to edit if you have an older computer, so it depends on the case in this one, I would say. What doesn't depend on the case is that it would definitely be better if it had the option to shoot all-eye or IPB. That's never a wrong one, so maybe that will come in the R6 Mark III in another 2 years, I guess, because, you know, they have to sell the future cameras as well. Another improvement over the R6 is about the frame rates. This camera can now shoot up to 180 frames per second video. I don't know, to be fair, why that's not 240 yet, like in many of the Sony cameras, but it's an improvement, so there you go. Compared to my EOS R, it's definitely better because I can shoot at 120 frames per second, but I don't have autofocus, which means that I never use it anyways. Another interesting thing to see was that they had fixed this focus breathing problem. For example, when you focus your camera onto a subject and then to the background, because I have an old lens here, which I can move the focus ring off manually. I hope you see that. Because the focus moves, then the lens needs to also move back and forth. Then it changes a little bit the field of view that you get. But they had fixed it now. So when the focus changes from the foreground to the background, then the field of view stays the same. So I think that is really great for the cinematographers out there. And speaking of focusing, now you can also choose to have the camera, when you leave the frame, not focus on the background, but stay there and wait for you again. Now it focuses on my hand, and when I move the subject out of the frame, it goes immediately to the background. But with this new option, the R6 Mark II doesn't do that. It just waits for you to get back into frame, and I also think that that's an interesting, a cool effect actually. And then another thing that was improved to help you get the right exposure was the false color. So the screen shows different colors in the areas which are overexposed or underexposed, and then I think red was the color when the footage is where the place is overexposed, and green when it was perfectly exposed. So that should help you get the right exposure. The question at the end of this video is, will I buy this camera? Well, I think I will, to be fair, because I have the EOS R and I'm lacking two things with this camera. One is the in-body image stabilization, and the other one is the lack of autofocus in high frame rates. But should you buy it if you already have the R6? In that case, I don't think it's necessary, because these two things that I would need you already have on the R6, and the autofocus, yes, it's improved, but by how much is it really improved? Is it worth spending like €1,000 more if you sell your current camera to go for it? I don't think so. Also, to add to it, the overheating issues. If you still have the old R6, it means that you didn't really have the overheating issues. Otherwise, you would have switched to a different camera already. So I don't think that would be a good idea. But anyways, this was my opinion. I hope you learned something from this. See you in the next one. Peace.